When I picture an autodidact, I tend to see a certain kind of person, and today we're going to describe the qualities of that person. I've learned guitar, Spanish, Chinese, writing, psychology, and more through self guided study. And after observing myself repeatedly facing the challenges that come up when you study something on your own, and by reading about it and watching others struggle with it, I've found that we require certain qualities to be a serious autodidact. So, this is a guide for those who want to be more than just autodidacts. We can actually turn ourselves into what I'll call a ruthless autodidact, which is a serial learner, someone who's a master at doing it alone. And this isn't the only way of learning, but it does have some enormous benefits. So, in this video, we're going to talk about the key qualities of the ruthless autodidact. This is Deep Psychology. I'm Ross. We blend spirituality, psychology, and self-help to shine a light on your inner workings. Listen if you want to get real, powerful insights and avoid all the fluffy nonsense that abounds in self-help circles. You'll know more about how your psychology works than 99% of people on the planet. Find me on all the major podcasting platforms or head to deep-psychology.com, visited by thousands every month, for tons of free resources. And I'm now on Patreon. I'd really appreciate you supporting the show, and in return you can access exclusive perks. Alright, time for the show. So before we talk about the qualities, let me talk a little bit about what an autodidact is. By being an autodidact, I mean mastering the art of learning subjects and skills through autonomous learning. This means searching out your own resources, creating your own goals and deadlines, and working autonomously. I don't mean teaching yourself something. I don't think that actually exists. I don't think we really teach ourselves things. You need to have some sort of model or reference or resources and to learn from those who went before you. But when you're an autodidact, it's mostly self-directed. You're organizing, you're setting the standard, um, you're creating the structures required for you to learn that thing, rather than informal learning environments where most of this is done for you. So let's look at the 5 key qualities of autodidacts. The first one is love for the craft. I think if you're going to learn something on your own, you need to have some sort of connection to it. External motivation can be motivating and important, but it only gets you so far. You know, when you're at university, for example, external motivation can get you up in the morning when you don't really want to. It can get you to study for exams, even if you don't really care about the content of the exam. But in autodidactism, it really doesn't work. You need to have a love for it. Otherwise, you're just not going to stick around for long enough. It should stir up wonder and inspiration within you. And just for the innate pursuit, the innate craft itself, the subject of study, it should just inspire you for what it is, rather than for what you're thinking you might gain from learning it, like more money or recognition or whatever it is. You should love it for its own sake. This is what will bind you to it over the months and years for long enough for you to actually develop some serious competency in it. And you should love the process of it. So let's say you're studying a language. You should actually love the process of studying the language, getting your books out, setting the timer, taking notes, memorizing things, listening to the audios and so on. You should actually enjoy the process, because this is what's going to get you to repeat the process of studying or of acquiring skills often enough and enough times to develop those skills. And when you're driven by the pursuit for its own sake, you're going to want to achieve for its own sake because you love it as an expression of your inspiration for it, rather than because someone else wants you to do something or because it's going to get you somewhere else, which isn't really the greatest motivation we can have. Second quality, and I think this is perhaps the most important of all the ones we're going to talk about, is determination and persistence. So I said that being an autodidact requires a certain mindset, and it's because the journey of self-taught or of, self-directed learning, it's kind of like navigating a desert or a jungle. You come up against all kinds of obstacles. You feel overwhelmed sometimes. You feel like there's no way through, that you can't continue. It's tough in there. And if you're not strong, if you're not determined and you're not persistent, then you're just going to get destroyed in there. Your strength and your will are tested. And if you're meek and you're passive and you're fearful, then you're not going to get anywhere with it, really. In a structured learning environment, like at school or university or, you know, any other kind of structured learning, these qualities are important, but they're not so crucial because the learning is spoon fed. It's all divided up into milestones. If you do a university degree, you know that you're going to have exams in a few months' time, and you know what they're going to be on, and you know that if you don't do the exam, you're not going to get your degree. So whether you like it or not, you're going to have to do the exam. Um, you need resilience, of course. You need resilience to study for your exams at university, but most of the hard work is done by other people. In autodidactism, it's not like that. You basically create the journey and you walk the journey. And most of the time, you can use courses and exams as as to give yourself a structure. But fundamentally, you are setting the structure, you're making the decisions. And if you're not determined and persistent, these obstacles that you meet are just going to destroy you. And persistence is so crucial because this is what keeps you going when you feel like you want to give up, when you feel like nothing is working, you feel like everything you've done is a waste of time. Persistence is what keeps you on the path. Okay, your inspiration and your motivation are important, but persistence is really the key factor. Are you able to just say, I'm going to keep going, I'm going to keep going, I'm going to keep going, no matter what? That is possibly the most crucial factor to being a ruthless autodidact. Trait number 3 is to be self organized, self motivated, and self reliant. So, as we've mentioned, in autodidactism, you tend to lack the routines and deadlines that you might get in a structured learning environment. You don't have the teacher figure a lot of the time who's, the one that keeps us on track, the one that organizes the course. They can be a shoulder to cry on, they can answer your questions. The lack of these things creates sort of tension and uncertainty and chaos. And I think this is why most people tend to rely on structured formal learning and, having a teacher and an authority figure, is because they're not organized and motivated and self-reliant enough to direct themselves over the course of months and years, and to be their own teacher, be their own authority, be their own guide on the path. On this journey, you can't look around for help too much. You can consult others, you can go on internet forums, and you can, talk to friends and family about it. But most of the time, you're going to be at home alone, studying or building skills or whatever. And if you don't set the agenda, nobody's going to come to your house. No one's going to come to your desk and set the agenda for you. That's, the shocking part about self-study or self-directed study is, there is no one there but yourself most of the time. And if you're not used to it, it can really, uh, it really puts you to the test. On the other hand, it's a good way to develop that organization and motivation and self-reliance that you're going to need if you want to be successful. The other thing is you need to define your targets. In a formal learning environment, your targets are predefined, And actually, you have very little say over what your targets are. You can target a certain grade, or you can maybe do things outside of your study program. But basically, it's all given to you. In When you're an autodidact, it's really not like that. You have to define your targets. You have to have a vision for what you want, short term, medium term, long term. And you have to stick to that and seek the answers yourself and find the way to those goals yourself rather than relying on the oracle figure or the institution. And you also have to learn to manage all the inner chaos that comes up. And that's where your persistence and your determination comes in. At the same time, I do recommend that you surrender to those who've gone before you and that you're learning from, whether it's books or courses or any other resource, and copy them. Nobody is truly self taught. I've already mentioned this, but I just want to repeat it that nobody is truly self taught. We all rely on role models and past masters. And as a general principle, it's best to learn what has been done, to learn what's been discovered and achieved before, and then overturn it later once you yourself have mastered and picked up those skills, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel before you're really ready to do that. And the only way to absorb all the pre-existing knowledge is to go to those who've already walked the path before you. Trait 4 is the ability to create structures and routines. So we lack externally imposed structures, yes, but we can create them. And something just as simple as having like a routine, certain days of the week for a certain amount of time, where you know exactly what you're going to be doing, or studying or whatever you're trying to achieve, you know um, when that's going to happen, how long it's going to happen for, and you have some way of registering it. If you can do this, you're already way ahead, and it helps to have things like, places that you study or places that you practice whatever it is you're practicing, or triggers for it, at a certain time of day or once you've completed a certain task. What you'll find is that if the freedom of learning on your own is very good and you should take advantage of that. But having a routine also is very freeing. Even that might sound paradoxical, but I've found this is true because when you have a routine, it frees up the time and mental space of thinking, oh, when am I going to do this? And for how long? And this and that and the next thing. You spend less time mulling over, the logistics, and more energy and more time can go into the actual practice itself. So don't idealize the freedom. Really, use the freedom that you have to create a certain structure within that freedom. And you'll find you actually get a bit more freedom when you do that. And also having this structure and routine, it helps you take your attention away from your fears and your uncertainty and all your doubt to simply doing the thing. So for example, instead of wondering how you're going to learn the language and if you're good enough to learn this language and exactly what routine you're going to follow, set the routine and then make that your focus. Don't focus on, the fears and the uncertainty that you have. Focus on doing the study. The goal is to do the study now. It's not to actually get good at the language. Make the goal to do your language study, and then let the bigger overarching goal take care of itself. What's going to happen after a certain amount of time, you won't have to will the habit of studying or dedicating time towards it because it will become ingrained. It just kind of happens. And then once you get to that level of automation, you're going to easily put in the hours that you need to get really good at whatever it is you're trying to get good at. I also think it's important, the routines I'm talking about are sort of a daily, weekly thing. I think it's good to have, you know, cycles, lasting a year or two where you're going to focus on a certain level or a certain facet of your pursuit. And again, this creates a kind of structure. This is how it works at university or school. Every year, you're covering certain topics and then you're moving on, you're not coming back to them. or you might come back to them, but you're coming back to them in another context or in a more difficult context. And I think that's important to have when you're working alone, because it gives you this mental framework for what you're doing, and you're not just like wandering through the desert. You have way stations, you have stops on the way, you have things that you know you have to achieve, you have milestones. And that takes us into our next trait, which is to set goals and to stick to them. One thing I've kind of always understood, I don't know if I got it from somewhere, if it's just some sort of innate knowledge I have about life, is that having a long term vision is really the key to getting good or to achieving things. And if you don't have a target, what's going to happen is you're just going to start going in circles. You're going to be doing this thing, you're not going to really know why you're doing it, and then eventually you'll run out of steam, and then you'll end up just back where you started, in that uncertainty, and without really having advanced, because you don't have something to aim towards. Therefore your energy is just getting dispersed, and it's not, there's no momentum being built. Goals provide a finality, they provide an outcome, they provide like a target for you to mobilize your forces and to move towards it. They focus your attention over the months and years. And these goals can't just be vague and half baked. It's not enough to say half heartedly desire to learn a language at some point in the future. It needs to be specific. It needs to be, I want to reach this certain level, because in say 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, it needs to be very specific, because that's what focuses your attention. If you just like, oh yeah, one day I'm going to learn this instrument, or one day I'm going to learn this language, it's not going to happen. It's really not going to happen. It needs to be very specific, and you have to set goals that might seem like way too much for you right now. I've talked about this in an article on my website called The Psychology of Setting Ambitious Goals. You might want to search for that on the website. But keep in mind that you're capable of much more than you can imagine right now. I know that sounds very cliche, but it really is true, especially when you start thinking years down the line. Set goals that scare you a little bit, and you'll be surprised at what you can achieve so long as you stick to them. What goals do as well is they sort of narrow down your options in a good way. When you're an autodidact, it can feel like you've got all these options, all these things you could get good at, and it can be confusing. You don't know which one to choose. It's best to choose something and work towards it, and then change it later on, rather than just working on 100 different things. It puts you under a certain amount of pressure as well. If you have a deadline for the next 6 months or the next year, the next 5 years, because it's going to mobilize that energy within you to get something done, and to overcome the obstacle. And in autodidactism, as we know, you don't have that imposed from the outside. Imposing it yourself through goals and deadlines and so on is I've found it to be absolutely essential. Goals are actually quite a complicated topic. How do you set goals? How do you set the right goals? How do you make sure you're following up on them? How do you take action? How do you burn the goal into your mind? Quite a complicated topic, but basically, as a starting point, I recommend you have several goals, several types of goals: short-term goals, medium-term goals, long-term goals. Short-term goals are within the next 6 months. Anywhere from sort of 1 month to 6 months is short-term in my mind. Medium-term is 1 year to 2 years. And then long-term is like, we're talking 3 to 5 years for long-term goals. And they should all complement one another. It should be like a cascade. The short term goals feed into the medium term, and those feed into the long term. And your long term goal is like your overarching vision at this moment in time. It's going to change over time as you improve. It's an overarching goal for what you want to achieve. So let's say you're learning a language, the overarching goal is to get, to maybe reach advanced level in the language. That's like your long-term overarching goal. And then you design the medium term and the short term around that particular goal. And again, just remember, you seriously underestimate what you can achieve on the timeline of 3 years to 5 years. And then going beyond 5 years, honestly, I think we actually don't know what we can achieve because we change so much and we acquire so many new skills that it's beyond our imagination, really. So working on that timeline, 3 to 5 years, but also being much more ambitious than you might tend to be, and you'll be surprised by where you can get to. All right, so just to sum up, what is the ruthless autodidact? The ruthless autodidact is the person who can autonomously learn any subject or skill. They are masters at navigating the challenging path to mastery and busting through all the obstacles and mental distractions that are in the way. They trust in persistence and the power of repetition. They lock their focus onto a goal and never rest until it is achieved because they are extremely persistent. And they primarily look inside for their inspiration because they love learning for its intrinsic rewards. And though they take guidance from masters and teachers, people who've gone before them, they don't get stuck in worship or idealizing or perpetual studenthood or being dependent on other people for their learning. All right, thanks a lot for joining me for this episode on the ruthless autodidact. I've actually got plenty of articles on learning on the website and the YouTube channel, so you can search around for those. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to have 2 episodes coming every week for the rest of the year, and I'm really looking forward to sharing more insights into our psychology with you. All right, take care. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.